Hello everyone. Today's video is going to be about reoccurring history and certain patterns. And you know how that saying goes, basically, if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. Well, I'm seeing some reoccurring patterns, and potentially the Yellow Vest movement itself may be a form of reincarnation of a very, very similar type of civil revolt. So with that in mind, let's see exactly where I'm sort of seeing this from. So here's an interesting article. It's called The 10 Most Lethal Civil Wars Ever Fought. We're going to go directly into number 9 and sort of make our way down. French Revolution Wars. Infamous for its use of newly invented guillotine and constantly changing tides of the political extremism, the French Revolution ended up involving a number of its neighbors as well as a pan-European bloodbath. The death toll was 2 million. Then we have the French Wars of Religion, fought primarily between the Huguenots, Protestants, and French Catholics. I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly, so do forgive me. The French War was of religion, also involved ongoing disputes between noble houses and a great deal of foreign involvement. They raged for more than 30 years, destroying whole villages in their wake. Death toll, 3 million. And here's where it's going to get interesting. Okay, so remember how the Yellow Vest movement, it starts from France, right? That's where this entire thing began. We just talked about the French civil, revolutions that happened there. And now we have this very iconic, symbolic resistance. The working class wearing yellow vests, expressing their discontent, expressing that they're not happy with the way that their country is governed. They're not happy with the lack of prosperity. They're not happy with the lack of safety. So moving on to this now. Over in China, there was the Yellow Turban Rebellion. Now, the Yellow Turban Rebellion is an interesting one because this appears to be where we're at now if some of this history is reoccurring. So the article goes on to say, we'll be touring China for the remainder of this list. The Yellow Turban Rebellion was fought against the Emperor Ling of China's Han Dynasty, involving secret Taoist societies, intrigued by court eunuchs, and natural disasters such as flood and famine. Death toll between 3 to 7 million. So, interesting that. We'll come back to more specifically to the Yellow Turban Rebellion in regards to spirituality and iconography, right? So we'll definitely come back to that in more detail, but let's go forward and see what the remainders are. So then we have the Chinese Civil War, another war that has arguably not officially ended. Both sides still claim sovereignty over both Taiwan and mainland China. This bloody communist revolt lasted 23 years, breaking only to fight the Japanese invasion prior to World War II. The death toll, 3.5 million. Right, next on the list, Dougen Revolt. An ethnic and religious war involving Muslim Chinese minority groups. This rebellion was set off by a pricing dispute over bamboo poles. After 15 years of intense bloodshed, it ended in the fight of many ethnic minorities to neighboring countries. Death toll 8 to 12 million. Just gonna say it right now, are we seeing some reoccurring patterns yet? Because if your alarm bells aren't ringing... But let's keep going. The Red Eyebrows Rebellion. Again, alarm bells, everyone. I'll explain why in just a moment. Also known as Chimay, the Red Eyebrows Rebellion was a pair of agrarian revolts against the Qing dynasty. It takes its unusual name from a story in which one of the generals involved ordered his troops to color their eyebrows red, so that to be better able to tell friend from foe. death toll 10 million. I'm going to kind of pause it there for just a moment and dial it back a little bit. Here we have the symbolism, this kind of iconography, these visual identifiers, right? On our side, the nationalist, the human sort of side, the side that actually wants to preserve our society and history, the side that opposes globalism, the side that basically wants countries to prosper and to have safety. Meanwhile, the opposition is currently planning their own little revolt against the Yellow Vests, calling themselves the Red Scarves. A direct globalist pro-EU group of people intend to wear red scarves and basically be in direct opposition to us. All that I'm saying is, it seems like a prelude for a very potential civil war. There are now two uniforms. If this comes into fruition, time will tell. Moving on with the article, but again, like I said, history appears to be kind of reoccurring here. Now we have, not sure how to pronounce that, Dougen Rebellion, the result of an attempted coup d'etat by Ephemius General Enlutian against the Tang dynasty. The general declared himself emperor of northern China, setting up a rival Yan dynasty, which lasted less than 10 years. Death toll 13 million. Then we have Taiping Rebellion. This began as the, oh god, how do you pronounce that? Millenarian movement, started by Hong Zhujuan, who claimed to have received visions announcing him as the younger brother of Jesus. It caused widespread plague and famine, along with its massive military casualties. Death toll 20 million. Again, is this not a very interesting part of history? I'm not sure about you, but I don't think many people are aware of, some of these. And lastly, this one, probably not so relevant to us, but just to conclude it, right? Last of China's great imperial dynasties, the Qing/Ming dynasty conquest. The Qing dynasty took over from the Ming over a period of about 40 years. The Ming dynasty fall arguably began when the emperor Hong Taiji died without a designated heir, sparking off an epic struggle of the control of China. Death toll 25 million. So, again, it seems like, obviously, these are very related to China and Chinese history and so forth, and it sort of starts with this Yellow Turban Rebellion, and various others seem to have some commonalities between the grievances of the people versus the people in control of the government. So let's dial it back specifically to the Yellow Turban Rebellion. Now, let me just pop this on screen. So there are various sources of information for this. I'm just going to try to make this as concise as possible. So we're going to go with a Wikipedia entry. Now, for those of you, like in academics and so on, you'll know that you won't reference Wikipedia because anyone can just go on there and just edit it, right? So this is a starting point of research, not an end point of research. What I'm saying is, do your own research, right? Don't take anyone's word as gospel. That's a kind of ethos that I live by. So let's kind of go over some of this as concisely as possible, because I was having a read of this last night and I just thought to myself, wow, this is remarkably similar to some of the circumstances we now find ourselves in. So the Yellow Turban Rebellion, also translated as the Yellow Scarves Rebellion, was a peasant revolt in China against the Eastern Han Dynasty. The uprising broke out in 184 AD during the reign of Emperor Ling. Although the main rebellion was suppressed in years by 185 AD, pockets of resistance continued and smaller new rebellions were started in later years. Thus, it took 21 years until the uprising was fully suppressed by 205 AD. The rebellion which got its name from the color of the clothes that the rebels wore on their heads, marked an important point in the history of Taoism due to the rebels' association with secret Taoist societies. The revolt was also used as an opening event in the 14th century historic novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms. Right, so let's go to the causes part. So, a major cause of the rebellion was an agrarian crisis in which famine forced many farmers and former military settlers in the north to seek employment in the south. Again, I'm going to pause it right there. We're seeing a great sort of shift of people across Europe, right? We're seeing a lot of people displaced from their indigenous ancestral, lands. They're traveling from parts of North Africa and the Middle East, from large, vast continents onto our very humble, small island, right? Now, obviously, due to cultural differences, due to oversaturation, there's less housing, there's less job opportunities, and there are cultural differences. And quite frankly, there are many bad people out there in this world, and many of which are coming here under the guise of, seeking refuge. And they're met with altruistic, good. People try to see good in others, but ultimately that kindness that we seem to have, the one that we are too empathetic to have, is being exploited. And the real thing we ought to be asking ourselves is, how much more will we permit this exploitation to continue? So moving back into this article, right? So again, massive displacement to the south, where the large landowners exploited the labor surplus to amass large fortunes. Again, cheap labor and someone exploiting them. Sounds very familiar, right? The situation was further aggravated by smaller floods along the lower course of the Yellow River. The peasants were further oppressed by high taxes imposed in order to fund the construction of fortification along the Silk Road and garrisons against foreign infiltration and invasion. In this situation, landowners, landless peasants, and unemployed former soldiers formed armed bands around 170, and eventually private armies, setting the stage for armed conflict. At the time, the Han central government was weakening internally. The power of the landowners had become a long-standing problem. But in the run-up to the rebellion, the court eunuchs in particular gained considerability in influence over the emperor, which they abused to enrich themselves. 10 of the most powerful eunuchs formed a group known as the 10 Attendants, and Emperor Ling referred to one of them as Zhang Rang as his foster father. The government was widely regarded as corrupt and incapable, and the famines and floods were seen as an indication that the descendant emperor had lost his mandate of heaven. Let's pause it right there for a moment. So we're, again, seeing everything with this EU sort of stuff, and it's a case of we think they're absolutely corrupt. In fact, no, we know they're absolutely corrupt. We've seen all the evidence. We don't need to even have an opinion on the matter. We know that we're being exploited. We know that somebody is lining their pockets with our resources, our money, our blood, sweat, and tears. The biggest resource, that we have, right? It's our time, it's our work effort. And when wages are suppressed by oversaturation of people from other lands effectively coming here, we're not going to be very happy, are we? The indigenous people of Europe are being, sort of undermined. Our quality of life is going down. Our safety is going down. Crime rates are going up. We're seeing new diseases that we've not experienced here in Europe. And it's all being imported from places, well, foreign to us, frankly. Moving on. Oh, one last point I suppose I should make there. Mandate of heaven. When they speak about the mandate of heaven, this is something that Roman mentioned as well, right? Over in France, they killed their king, right? A king, a monarch, a sovereign, however you wish to refer to such individuals as, right, is somebody that the common people have this belief that they're ordained for greatness in life, that they have the higher will, that they are representative of the regular people. The question you have to be asking yourself is, do you feel represented by our government? And I think I'm not even going to have to argue that point. You don't. So, moving on. Because of its plan for a new beginning, the Taoist sect of Zhang Zhu proved to be the Han Dynasty's most dangerous enemy. In preparation for his revolt, Zhang Zhu sent disciples out to gain support and organize followers throughout North China. Political discontent, as well as droughts and plagues, fueled public resentment against the Han government. The rebels even had allies in the imperial court, and they were able to make their preparations whilst government officials were either ignorant of their intent or intimidated by their powers. Zhang Zhu planned a rising throughout the Han Empire, but before the call to arms had been issued, the plan was betrayed. The rebel sympathizers in Luoyang were arrested and executed, and the revolt in the provinces had to begin ahead of time. The second month of 184, I guess AD, it's missing that part. Despite the premature call and an inevitable lack of coordination, tens of thousands of men rose in rebellion, government offices were plundered and destroyed, and the imperial armies were immediately forced onto the defensive. So, right, we're going to kind of, I'll leave you guys to read the rest of this. You can find it in Wikipedia, and there's several other sources which are cited here, including books with ISBN numbers and so forth. So again, conduct your own research. This is just me kind of giving you my perspective on what I'm seeing as history sort of repeating itself somewhat. So let's kind of talk about the being on the defensive side as we just finished off that paragraph. The Brexit vote, right? We're about to get potentially a no deal, which is what we want, the WTO and all that fun stuff. Our government is now pretending, not pretending, but they're preparing for, right, a defensive action against street riots. But hold on a minute, I thought the left were peaceful and tolerant. Why would they go and damage, their capital? I thought they liked democracy. I suppose they only like it when it goes their way, right? So, effectively, we're in this weird kind of, parallelity. It's between the past and present. We have the yellow vests. They will have the red scarves, potentially as of Sunday, or at some point during this weekend. The government is preparing a defensive action in preparation for civil revolt, riots, disobedience, and so forth. Every Saturday, we have to go onto the streets and effectively protest and stand together against the corruption that is within our government. And that's basically where I'm kind of going to conclude this and basically say we live in very, very interesting times. I suppose one very, very final end note. This culture war, it's not even about left versus right. It's about removing the corruption that is within our government. Yes, there will always be nationalism versus globalism. I just think that some people want this unified world, but I think many of us patriots and nationalists that wish to preserve our culture and our heritage, we will always advocate for borders. And ultimately, I suppose we're going to have to really understand how this is going to play out. How can we remove the corrupt elements within our government if we cannot unify against our government. Do you think that those peasants over in China cared whether they were capitalists or communists or socialists or whatever? When they were diseased and starving, do you think they really cared? Ultimately, they came together to remove the corrupt elements of government so that they could prosper and have food on the table and roofs over their heads. So, in the initiative of the RIC/CIR, a citizen's invocation of a referendum, right? We also have a kind of ideological pause/truce until this one single policy is implemented. Once the single policy has been implemented, right, and our government officials can be accountable. So if someone goes against their constituents and does not represent them, we invoke this thing and we get them out, we replace them. Problem solved. It changes the dynamic of our interaction with the government. It changes how we protest. With that in mind, I suppose, put on your yellow vest,